Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Miller's Military Moments. I'm your co host for today, Jason Miller, Master Sergeant retired. And so when I say co host, that means we've got our other co host with us today, Grant Belvin. Thanks for joining me on the show today, brother.
Always a pleasure, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, dude, it is always a pleasure. I love having you on. I love our shows and getting the chance to, one, connect, with me and you, and then also our episodes. The topics we cover, are pretty interesting and exciting. So, again, as always, I'm excited, but I think I'm excited for every show. But it's
Yeah.
this one is really cool. We've got a guest from Ben Ford, former Royal Marine and founder of Commando Development. And so he lives across the pond in England. And so, really, I think all of our listeners know are one of our really biggest, if not the most important ally in a lot of ways, not just military, but a civilian structure and everything in the world. So, England. But it's great to have that perspective and to be able to bring somebody to share their perspective of their experiences in the military serving and the places, because they've been right there with us through Afghanistan, through Iraq, and a whole bunch of other places that we're not allowed to talk about from time to time. But so it really is exciting, and I'm excited to have Ben on the show today. And before we jump into that, if you haven't found my website, millersmilitarymoments.com, that's the best place to find me and everything else. And then I really want to point everybody's attention to, on the website, there's a resources page, which is probably my favorite page. And it has a list of veteran owned businesses that I support and I trust. And of course, Grant, with his Project Capable is on there, and you can go there and read, about his, and actually click on the link to go to his website and, get in touch with him. And there's others on there too. So they are not paid advertisements. They're not paying me anything. I actually believe in them and trust them, and, want you to be aware of those opportunities with veteran owned businesses. So yeah, so check that out on the site. And of course, Grant, as always, I mean, y'all can find him through my website or go direct to projectcapable.com. And he's doing a great thing out there with helping get you ready for the challenges in life out there. So yeah. All right. Awesome. So Ben Ford, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. You've had an incredibly busy week. Listen, time is valuable and precious. So thank you so much for coming on the show and joining us, brother.
My absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this all week, actually. So it's late afternoon Friday here. So this is my kind of wind down for the week. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sweet. Well, that's good to know. One, that you've been excited about it, but two, you kind of get to wind down and hang out with a Marine and a soldier from across the pond and chit chat a little bit. So, as a former Royal Marine, I mean, what is that? Yeah, share with us. I mean, I don't know all the details either. Really, like, what is that? What can you relate that service to any of our services, and what does that kind of mean for you?
Sure. So the Royal Marines are the UK's commando forces. So they're kind of, tier two from special forces, I guess. So the equivalent of, I guess, Rangers, USMC, Recon, that type of thing, right? They're a small unit. The training is 32. The basic training is 32 weeks long. So I think like the longest in the Western world. And pretty brutal, so culminating in the commando test. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess I would put it around about the same level as SEALs basic training, perhaps. And okay. I'm sure SEALs would probably go red with rage, but there it is, I said it.
I'm sure they would. And hey, if there's any current or former Navy SEALs that would like to come on and have that argument, I welcome it. Let's bring it on and let's have that discussion. So that's awesome. Okay, so definitely a special forces, small unit tactics. What is, when we look at some of our special forces like the Rangers, we talk about in generalities, they are very well trained war fighters on the small tactical level, securing airfields. They get some of the toughest tasks where we got to send physical people in. we call them our 18 series, our Green Berets, which are kind of famous in the world, right? Like that concept. They are small group trainers. Like they train, indigenous forces to try to, be better, at military stuff, but they typically aren't the trigger pullers unless they just have to be. And then our Navy SEALs, how dare I say if they can't do anything, but they
They write
them
good
and
books.
right, them
Yeah.
and Delta, they can do it all, and they're just badass at anything. So that's kind of a good, you kind of fall into the Ranger 18 series kind of type thing for us Green Berets.
So the history of the Royal Marines is quite interesting. So the Royal Marines was originally amphibious infantry, a bit like the US Marines. So they were raised in mid 1600s. So they're one of the oldest
Wow.
standing military formations as well.
Okay.
And then the commando role came about during the Second World War. So very much kind of born from the Special Operations Executive and that kind of irregular warfare. And then so we've kept our Green Beret and Commando designation since then. But I guess the role of the Royal Marines is more like a light infantry. But essentially, I mean, we don't do. I mean, we've been right there in Afghanistan throughout some of the toughest fighting in southern Afghanistan. This was after my time, after I left. But the intent of 3 Commando Brigade is to be a bit like an airborne unit, like the 82nd or something like that, I guess in US parlance. So self-contained shock troops, lightly equipped, and basically ready to take on pretty much anything. So that's why the training is so extensive, is that I think the more kind of elite you get as troops, the more self-directed and self-motivated you want those guys to be. So you ingrain more and more of the kind of doctrine, and the Marines have the Royal Marines ethos is be the first to oh my god, I'm going to screw it up now. It's be the first to understand, the first to adapt and respond, and the first to overcome. Apologies, that should have tripped off my tongue.
No, that's all right. That's okay.
It's been a long time since basic training.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, but that's it, and that's important. And I think that phrase and that motto. I mean, Grant, you have also operated in smaller teams than I have. As an aviation guy, I'm not that my teams were big, but I mean in a different manner. So I think you can relate, Grant, to that type of training, especially with some of your advanced courses in there.
Yeah. So we, of course, as a scout sniper, we operated in 4-man teams. And typically we would stay with the 4-man team, depending on the mission. If it was urban, we might have a fire team or squad of infantry Marines with us as security. Or we may split the 4-man team into 2-man teams and cover each other and have intersecting fields of fire depending on the mission. But yeah, the small team stuff, I love that, being an independent operator. It's I mean, the autonomy and ability to operate how you want to, especially as a team leader. Coming up with, obviously you go with the commander's intent and the mission, but then you have your own kind of sub intent to accomplish that mission and stay within the commander's intent. So it's in combat, you never want to say it's a fun thing, but it gets the adrenaline going. I mean, you're out there, and especially in a small unit, independent operator, it's quite a role.
Yeah.
Well, I think the important, and really it's not that, right, like fun or whatever, but as both of you were talking about the autonomy, the ability the allowance to make decisions. What's that?
I have a copy of Warfighting, which is the USMC operations manual, if you like.
There you go.
Yeah.
One of the things on my shelf.
Yeah. Very nice.
Great shout out to the United States Marine Corps there. and even a Royal Marine, is reading your stuff USMC, so you must be doing something okay. But yeah, I mean, so that that autonomy to make the decisions, whatever needs to be made to accomplish the mission, and that's what those small teams, which is also why you go through training for so long, because they want to make sure obviously they can trust you, and you understand everything that's at stake. But that's also why those teams are successful. I mean, you've got the training, but you now have the freedom to accomplish the mission, and y'all will just kind of figure it out sometimes on the ground, like, hey, you're going into this kinetic situation, here's the intent, but y'all are good, y'all, you got it figured out, and then accomplish the mission. So yeah, I think it's definitely an advantage to those small teams, for sure. So some of your experiences overseas in general, maybe some of the timelines, or Iraq, Afghanistan, or some of those other places.
Sure. So I only served a relatively short period of time. So I joined in 2000, left in 2004.
Okay.
I did a few kind of the standard things that were going on at that time. So I did a short tour of Sierra Leone shortly after a pretty nasty civil war. I did a tour of Northern Ireland, which was still bubbling on a little bit at that time. A few deployments to Norway to do our Arctic warfare training as part of Commando Helicopter Force, which was the unit I was in when I left. And then in 2003, I was with Commando Helicopter Force when we did the invasion of the Al-4 Peninsula as part of what we called Optelic, but Iraq 2 essentially.
Right. Okay.
And it's also worth mentioning that I was a signaler, so I was unfortunately back on ship for most of the time in Iraq, and only got ashore, I don't know, a week after.
Yeah.
I mean, if you remember, like 2003, the Iraqis were rolled over in a very short amount of time. Everyone thought the mission was accomplished, and then obviously the whole shit show kicked off for the next 10 years.
Right. Oh yeah.
In that interim time, that was the time I was in Iraq.
Yeah. No, we're very familiar. Grant and I have talked about that before. I was also in the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then through March, I spent a year there at that time as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was interesting. Like, I mean, the first get up there, and we went from Kuwait all the way north. My unit, we were supposed to come through Turkey, and then politics got involved. We had to get rerouted to Kuwait, but they still pushed us all the way north up to Tikrit. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so after a few months, right, mission accomplished, we're good to go. And then we're like, all right, when are we going home? And then 9 months later, we finally got to go home. But yeah, so definitely some interesting experiences there for you. And does anything stand out as far as like whether it was maybe a challenging one or interesting, or doing some of the Arctic warfare? I think is intriguing for a lot of people. It is myself. I've never experienced any of it, so I don't know. Maybe what was that like?
So yeah, I mean, Arctic warfare's great. The north of Norway is absolutely beautiful, and going there with Commando Helicopter Force, which is actually a Navy unit. So the Royal Marines, cycle a commando unit pretty much through Norway every year. And the commando, the Royal Marine version of Norway training is like, really hardcore, operating from skis and a big sled that you pull behind you with all your gear. Is really tough. Going with the Navy is a little bit more relaxed, let's say.
Yeah.
So, you go out, you do survival exercise, you learn how to pull the sled, but you don't have to do the kind of the cold water dunking that is the kind of the highlight of the slightly more cheeky version. Right. But yeah, you go to northern Norway a couple of months before Christmas. The sun goes down, it doesn't come up. You come home for Christmas, the sun goes down, doesn't come up again until, I guess February time.
Wow.
And all of our training, actually it was great fun, because all of our training consisted of taking a BV, which is a bi-cabbed tracked vehicle, driving that up into the beautiful mountains around Bardufoss, which is north of the Arctic Circle, and setting out helicopter landing tees for the helo guys to come and practice, landing at night and doing load drop-offs and pickups. Mm-hmm. So the job would be, you drive up, you'd set your tee out, and then you'd put a load, or the cab or the helicopter would bring a load and drop it off. and you'd have to run forward through, knee or hip deep snow, get underneath this hovering helicopter and unhook the load. And I think they worked out at some point that the wind chill factor of a helicopter's downdraft with minus 25 degree temperature is about minus 80. So that's a I mean, you're wearing this big suit, so
right,
and you're running through snow, so you don't get cold, but it is cold. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. That is crazy. I mean, the cold is not appealing to me, but also the heat is not either. I mean, I guess with the cold you can put more clothes on, but to be in, I mean, you have to be in really great physical condition to do the things you're talking about doing. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand about being in great physical condition. There's two parts of it in my mind. It's one, you need to be able to physically accomplish it, but it's the second part of it is you need to be in good enough physical shape to accomplish it and not be concerned about your physical conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're thinking about being tired and you're getting exhausted, you are not thinking about the mission. You're not thinking about all the details that go along with it. So that's some pretty incredible stuff.
It's interesting that military training gets you very fit, but it's not really about training fitness. Like if you wanted to train athletes, you definitely wouldn't put them through basic training, because it's actually really more about training the ability to deal with being fucking uncomfortable and unhappy, and not giving up. That's really, it's at least 50% that, and the rest of it is, okay, you run a bit and you do some pull-ups and press-ups and you actually get fairly fit. But if the goal was just to train fit people and make fit human beings, you would have them doing a week of CrossFit.
Right.
You'd have them just doing like CrossFit or physical fitness, and actually breaking people's bodies down as basic training does is really more about training the mental side, I think.
Right. No, I think, absolutely agree. At least Grant can definitely agree to this. Our Marine Corps does a much better job on the physical, conditioning and the breakdown, than the Army does. Not that we do a poor job, but we definitely, again, with the massive amount of people, our standards, I don't want to say they're low, but we've just got to try to cover a lot bigger population, than the Marine Corps and then the Royal Marines. So, but yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. So, Grant, have you spent any time in some snow?
No, so when my battalion went to Bridgeport, California, which is where we do our mountain warfare training, they went when I was in Scout Sniper Basic course, so they got to endure the the cold. I think it's around 10,000 feet is the elevation, and they had to go through, the knee deep snow, doing the whole deal, what Ben's talking about, dragging the sleds on the skis. Yeah, they were miserable. And I was in Southern California, on the beach. So,
right.
Of course I was going through sniper school, but I'm glad I didn't have to go to Bridgeport. So
yeah, for sure. So, it's interesting, Ben, that you talk about having to go and release the load from the helicopter, because I'm a Black Hawk guy. So I've been a crew chief, a lot of my time, and I've done sling loads in all kinds of places. And so, but me as the crew chief, I release the load.
Yeah.
So nobody has to, the only time you have to get underneath the helicopter and get beat up like that is when you're attaching it.
Yeah.
But other than that, like we will, we'll come in, hover, and then once I see it on the ground, we get enough slack, we'll slide 10 feet to the left, boom, I release it, and then we're out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, and then, the only snow, well, before going to Afghanistan, our mountain training was up in Colorado, up in the Rocky Mountains, and we would spend a couple weeks up there doing this, what you're describing. We do all the daytime stuff, and when we did all the nighttime stuff and get the snow blowing around. And after like several times, I'm like, am I really expected to see, the snow is,
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm sticking my head out the window as a crew chief because I'm trying to like get visual on the ground and calling it. And it's like, because we have a radar altimeter that's, telling the pilots the actual feet, but you don't know how to trust that. And so as crew chiefs, that's what we do. We get outside the window and we're like looking down, it's like snows at the tail, snows at the door, snows in my window. I can't see. Like,
yeah.
Drop the collective and smash it down on the ground, and we'll be okay. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's been a few times where the helos would come in, and they've got, obviously this is pilot training as much as it is everybody else's training. So you'd have people come in a little bit too hot, and something would fall off the back of, like, I think the Lynxes, perhaps Lynxes or gazelles, which are the smaller helicopters. They have the thing that hangs off, something that hangs off the tail, and there was at least one occasion where they come in a bit too hot, and something would fly past us at a great rate of knots because they've screwed it up. So it's not without a certain amount of risk.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so dust and snow for me was just, I hated it. And I think Iraq was worse for the dust than Afghanistan. It just depends on, a lot of times in Afghanistan, I mean, we didn't land except for in certain spots. So but I was in Afghanistan kind of later, so the dust is just, oh my gosh, man. Yeah. And when you're doing, I mean, we, especially in '06, we were doing a lot of air assault and kinetic missions, so you don't have time to mess around, like especially on resupplies. We dropped the guys off 2 days ago. They're conducting operations. It's very kinetic. They need food, water, ammo, medical, and we're here to drop it off. And they make the tea, they put it in this field, and of course all they really care about is they look at, like, all around to make sure we have space. Yet this is in a farmer's field where it's like all these ridges that are like a foot tall, and here we come in and bam, hit it down, and we're like this. Like, holy smokes. But and then you got to get, as a crew chief, we got to get out, throw all the stuff off to the side, and then we get out of there. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then the dust is just, oh my God, it gets in your teeth, gets in everything, and you're like, oh, this sucks. But when I would leave there and then head back to Taji and get my ice cream before I went to bed, it didn't suck too bad. So now I felt bad for the guys on the ground, but hey, that's life in aviation sometimes.
Ups and downs, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, cool. So your time, I mean, in the military, when you get an opportunity to serve in those small units, highly trained units, we have seen over time people come from those units and either do well in business or do well, even on the corporate side or in politics, sometimes. And so you have started your own company.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did that training, really kind of prepare you for that? And why do we see sometimes those people like yourself be maybe more successful than others in adventures like this?
Yeah, well, that's a deep subject. And actually, the book that I held up a minute ago, War Fighting, is one of the major clues to it. So I didn't realize any of this stuff when I was in the military. In fact, after I left in 2004, so my transition out of the military was really two things. On the way to Iraq on board ship, I realized that I probably wasn't going to make a very long-term career of it. So I wanted to, pick up some skills, use my time on ship wisely and pick up some skills. So I bought myself a couple of books through the ship's post on the way out there. One of them was on programming and one of them was on this operating system called Linux. And I basically used my time like breaking and fixing my laptop and learning the basics of coding. So that was one thing. That was sort of determined the trajectory of the career that I moved into. And when you go into a career like programming, it's very difficult to see how much overlap there is, right? You're sitting in a nice office, you're doing code, and for several years I didn't really kind of consider, I thought that it was a very delineated what I did then, what I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And the other kind of formative experience was so in the Marines, in our Marines in 2003, the comms kit that we had to use was utter dog shit. It was terrible stuff. It was analog radios, high frequency, so the really staticky kind of the thing where you have to string out an antenna and bounce signals off the ionosphere is literally,
Yep.
1950s technology.
Right.
Yeah.
I only laugh because we had the same stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so frustrating, man.
Yeah. And I remember, like, I was already thinking about leaving, and I remember, I mean, this wasn't like the straw that broke the camel's back, but as we were practicing for the mission to take our 4, we had a bunch of Navy SEALs with us on secondment who went in with the first troops. They came in on our helicopters, and I remember being in Saudi, setting up the command post in preparation. And I don't know, we must have been 3 days in the desert, moving antennas, putting them up, changing the lengths, fucking, all of this stuff.
Angles.
Yeah, angles and height off the ground and all this nonsense, merely to be able to talk to ships that were 50 kilometers offshore, right?
Right.
And soul destroying at the best of times. And then the SEALs rock up, right? And literally a couple of hours before we're ready to go, this dude turns up in his truck, big comms truck, parks up next to our CP and basically gets out of his cab, presses a button, up goes a hydraulic mast, and he picks up his handset and he just has comms straight away. And I'm like, you're fucking kidding me. Like, and that, that's two things. It's a funny story.
Right.
It's also important because people recognize the kit that they're given, and people, feel like, this is the comms kit is one example, but in Iraq we also had unarmored Land Rovers, and we also had body armor without the plates, right? And people notice that shit, and people, if they feel like they're not being looked after, which frankly, if your means of resupply and keeping on top of technology is 50 years behind, you are not being looked after, people leave. And that's one of the reasons I voted with my feet, as well as feeling somewhat nervous about the direction that our future military strategy was taking, and thinking that I didn't want to be doing back-to-back Afghan tours for the next 5 years, which turned out to be a good decision. But that was a long
No, that's good.
question.
That's good.
But to go back to your question, the reason that military guys do well, and especially like this kind of small unit military guys, is because the world of business, and especially technology of today, is way more like a battlefield than it is a factory. So we've got all of the kind of management and leadership books that are all about like this kind of peculiar Western view that we have of the individual, the great leader kind of myth. And we have all these books about efficiency and treating businesses like some sort of factory. But actually, as technology and ecosystems change, it's way more like being in a kinetic war zone than it is being in a steady state factory paradigm. And that's one of the reasons why I think guys like us do so well.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I really do. And I can see the parallels. I see especially in the technology field. So just a little snippet about me. I mean, I like technology. I enjoy it. I did just retire. I mean, I think 3 weeks ago is my official retirement date. So the last year and a half, though, I had also been working on, what is it that I want to do when I grow up, And so technology was one of the first things I started with. And I, did some Google search and stuff like that. But I asked people in the industry, like, okay, do I need to go get the formal education, or what do I need to do? And they all said, no, stay away from the school, go get the certifications, because it moves so fast and we are so kinetic.
Yeah.
And then use your skills that you've learned from the military to apply that. So absolutely, I agree with what you're saying, and I think it's very valuable. All of them said, yeah, if you go get a computer science degree from a school, you're 8 to 10 years behind already.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the really important things, and I know Grant definitely has something to add to this, that the tenacity to overcome and the unwillingness to quit
Yeah.
is those skills that, like you said, you didn't really know how to put that into the business world at the time. But as you made that transition, it turns into, people around you are like, well, wait a minute, he gets it done every time.
Yeah.
Like that's who I want to lead this team. Yeah, but he doesn't know anything about IT. No, I don't care. He can put this team together and figure it out because he's unwilling to quit. I think is a lot of what you're talking about, and those skills that we've learned, and sometimes we are not very good at translating into the civilian speak.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, and I
And
think
it's unwillingness to quit, but it's also comfort with complexity, right? The world is getting much less black and white, and it's interesting that all of the current problems that we seem to be having in foreign policy, and the screw ups in Afghanistan and previously, I mean, this is a very gross simplification, but one of the very fundamental underlying reasons for that is that politicians and leaders at the top of organizations want to deal in certainty, and people that have been at the teeth of any military organization are completely comfortable with chaos and uncertainty. And it's that comfort with chaos and uncertainty and ambiguity, VUCA, that people increasingly need as especially as things change really quick. So I think that's another reason.
Yeah, I agree. And Grant, I'm gonna let you jump in because you've definitely have experienced those instances in the military and then out, and have seen the ability to figure things out on the move and understand that complexity and then be able to translate it. So what do you think?
Yeah, the intangibles that you learn through these experiences are, I mean, just can't be replicated in a classroom or instructional or an environment. So, when you've got guys that come out of combat operations, you can pretty much bet that they're going to be equipped to handle these complex scenarios that we're talking about, these stress scenarios, versus someone who hasn't been in that situation. And you, as a business owner or someone who's in charge of hiring or whatever it may be, you see the military vet, especially a combat vet, the unwillingness to quit, the grit, the determination, the perseverance, all those things. It's all going to be there. And like I said, it can't be taught in the classroom. It has to be experienced.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so just to put into context, like the amount of money that gets spent on you as a military person by the time you leave, if say you leave as even as a fairly junior enlisted person, right, the amount of money that gets spent on your development is easily the equivalent of an MBA, right? So it's it's an MBA in dealing with complexity, and it's exactly what you need for somebody who is in a leadership position in a fast changing environment.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to go back to something you said, talking about, you didn't have plates and stuff. And so in 2003, I was part of the initial invasion in Iraq, and, the United States military were the best equipped and best dressed military in the world. Right. So I say that tongue in cheek because I deployed with 2 desert uniforms. That was it. Normally we have like 4. I only got 2. And the vest I had, none of us had plates either. And in fact, I didn't even know we were supposed to have plates. Okay. Like I just, and I rode all the way from Kuwait. It was 500 and something miles up to Tikrit in a, like you said, a soft sided Humvee.
Yeah.
Like I'm just chilling, back here, like, hey, all right, I got my M16, I'm sitting on my vest, I think, at times because my ass was hurting so bad from the stupid seats, And then like we were going through the north side of Baghdad, kind of on our way out, and there's still sporadic like gunfire, and a couple of times you'd hear the main gun of the Abrams go off, and some small building explodes, and you're like, oh, like, and you're just like, okay, this is what I got. Like that's it, And people are like, they're like, what? You didn't have a vest? Like you didn't have armor plates? Like, no, man, we none of that stuff was
Yeah.
around in '03. So, and then we had the same radio technology you're talking about, and trying to figure out how to talk to people, and like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it's frustrating, but we figured it out
Yep.
painstakingly, but we figured it out, which really is, what you're kind of getting to as well. And so, what's interesting, honestly, about this conversation, and I didn't think about this ahead of time, being a military transition story, because that's one of the stories that I do. I bring guys on to share their transition. But this is your experience is really just as much that type of story than anything, and recognizing what skills you have and able to translate them to a sector and recognize them, and then also seeing deficiencies out there within the business world and being able to take advantage of that and being like, that's what I want to do, and that's what I want to make an impact on.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of exactly the position that I'm in now. I became increasingly frustrated over the last sort of 5 years as a technologist, being in these very fast-moving environments with leadership that just didn't have a fucking clue how to operate in those environments, and that all rolls downhill to the poor guy on the, as always, right? It's the person at the edges of the organization that knows the world best, who is being poorly led, who feels let down. And so, I spent, when I guess Team of Teams, Extreme Ownership, Turn the Ship Around, they all came out around the same time in like 2015, 2016. And I was already starting to make some links between, some of the military doctrine that I remembered. And so I spent, several years doing a pretty deep study on like what actually was it behind the stuff that we learned in the military. And it turns out the guy that was the big inspiration for the US Marine Corps' new doctrine direction, an Air Force guy called John Boyd. And for any non-military people listening to this, to have an Air Force guy dictate any kind of doctrine at all to anyone who calls themselves a Marine, that guy's got to be fucking good.
Yes,
right? And it's got to be very, very good doctrine, right?
Yep.
So his ideas, this guy John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot in Korea, and he cut an absolute path through everything from fighter tactics all the way through to grand strategy. And it's his teachings on this thing called the OODA loop, which really underpins everything the US Marine Corps comes out with now. And it was discovering that body of work and that kind of, all of the stuff that Boyd researched and folded into his methodology and his ideas that really made me understand the depth of stuff that you can take from the military and apply to civilian contexts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So you mentioned Team of Teams, and General McChrystal, wrote that book, and I reference it quite a bit. I love the concept of flattening the organization.
Yeah.
When I was, a first sergeant, so a senior leader in the company level, as often as I could, the commander and myself would brief the entire company.
Yeah.
And then, let people execute, but we wouldn't just meet with the platoon sergeants, platoon leaders, and then let them push out information. And it wasn't because we don't trust them. We absolutely trust them to execute. We just want everybody all the way down to the edges of the formation to know and understand the intent, the mission.
Yeah.
And then you get that buy-in from them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we discovered, even at the aviation level, like, sometimes we're kind of structured a little bit, but is, listen, those crew chiefs and even young NCOs have a lot of intelligence and smarts. And if the senior guy just doesn't quite have the right answer, they can be like, oh, well, the intent is to do this, so how about let's change it up. and figure this out. And then it's like, oh yes. But if they didn't know all that, they'd be stuck in the dark, and they fall into the I just do what I'm told,
Yeah.
method. So I think, I love the team of teams. Flatten the organization is a big thing for me. And then you get that buy-in from the edges for sure.
Yeah. I mean, to Grant's point earlier, like commander's intent. So one of the things that Boyd studied an awful lot was the German Blitzkrieg sort of doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And that made up, a large part of his thinking. But the thing that sort of, and I mentioned in the pre-show chat that I've been doing some training with a company called Red Team Thinking. So red teaming is obviously a way of coming to better decisions, strategic decisions mainly. But the mix of team of teams, Boyd's work, Red Team Thinking made me realize that the thing that we really, really don't understand in the West as a whole is that leadership is not just a set of individual skills. It's no good having somebody be an individually brilliant leader, because leadership is actually a system, right? It's the system of communication. It's that flattening of the organization that you talked about. And it's the system that makes good organizations, not individuals. Because a system means that when an individual moves on, as increasingly happens in civilian life now, people come and join a company for 2 years or whatever. If that is the individually brilliant leader and then they disappear and they take all that brilliance with them, you're fucked. But if you've got the system that enables, allows, brings people up, encourages the right communication, that's the key. That's the big, big difference.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. That is the very big difference. We in the West definitely, and I'm just trying to think, I'm thinking of big CEOs in our country. We pay them exorbitant amounts of money, and we give them so much credit for making some decisions in a company that has 1 million employees all over the world.
Yep.
And then when they suck real bad at it and they get fired and they still get a golden parachute of $50 million bonus, like what?
Yeah.
Like really? And that's kind of what you're talking about. We don't understand the real, leadership and impact and how to establish that organization. I don't want to say we don't understand as a whole. I mean, we do. Some parts of our business world and some parts are getting it. They're getting better at it. And I think a lot of them that are getting better at it are because of people like yourself that are learning these things and then sharing them and actually doing those within their sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And then you in turn are creating those same people that have the same mindset that can just take those skills somewhere else and also create that same mindset and culture, which is really important and could be huge. Your example of the whole, business, especially in technology, it's not a manufacturer. I mean, I'll just pull out the Henry Ford T model, let's put it on an assembly line and let's just punch it out. Like, no. And if you are an organization that is stuck like that today, you're not going to last too long. I mean, honestly.
No, absolutely not. Like the factory mentality, although, so, I mean, the simplistic factory mentality of, I've got a bunch of widgets to make. I just tell people how to make the widgets. All right. I don't know how that came about as a leadership methodology, because that's never what the people that are attributed to having said that really meant. So, you talk about, like, let's say the Toyota production system, right? That's really about empowerment, right? It's about building better factories, but it's about building that by empowering people and having trust within teams. And that always gets missed for some reason, right? It's always like, oh yeah, you optimize the throughput and, twiddle the bottlenecks and stuff like that. But that's bullshit. It's all about people. It always has been.
Yes, it always has been, and it always will be. And that it's the people and the trust. Grant and I talk about this all the time. U.S. military is terrible about this part. We don't trust anybody to do anything when we're at home in garrison.
Yes.
You're not, the junior enlisted guy's not even allowed to come out of his room or or without permission, or eat a piece of fried chicken at the chow hall without getting permission. Yet when we're downrange, these people are trusted to pull the trigger, make decisions. They fix helicopters. They do
Yeah.
some serious. They take on serious responsibility and they execute flawless
Yeah.
because we trust them. There,
Yeah.
but you're right.
I mean, it's such a bizarre thing. Like I remember having a chat with a guy who uh, a Royal Marine bootneck who commanded a company in Afghanistan, like when it was really, really kinetic down in like Helmand or somewhere. And he was saying, when it was war fighting, it's like 100 guys in unison, like running rings around the Taliban by doing the unexpected. It's pure OODA loop, Boyd, maneuver warfare, just the awesome stuff, right? And he's got guys that been in the forces for maybe 3 or 4 years, making decisions that would be incredibly consequential decisions. And then he's saying, like, and now I'm back at the MOD, Ministry of Defense, and I waste half a day trying to get sign off on a £20 fucking parking voucher. Like, how? And this is the really interesting thing that all companies seem to have, right? Is that
Right.
you have this bureaucracy and this network, which is supposed to be about economies of scale, and ends up being that thing that you just said, which is, not trusting people. And yet you have people that can do the most amazing things, and somehow the bureaucracy is raised, and the informal network that McChrystal talks about has been attenuated. And that's another thing that the operational side of the military gets absolutely right, is all of that bureaucracy and bullshit fades into the background as a support function, as it always should have been. And the informal network of getting stuff done and being pointed in the right direction by mission command and commander's intent is the thing that comes to the fore. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. People in groups under little pressure always end up fucking things up for some reason. I think it's the pressure you need, maybe.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, what do you think, Grant?
Yeah, I don't know. It's we have a lot of similarities, our militaries. So that's interesting to know that's pretty common. But yeah, I mean, it's all about what you expect of someone is how they're going to perform. So if your expectations of them is just a peon paper pusher that is worthless, then that's the level that they're going to perform at. Yep. But if you have expectations that are very high and you empower them and you trust them, then they're going to perform better. So
yeah.
Two key words, both y'all: empower them and trust them. I mean, we've all said it today. It's that, I mean, it just can't be understated. I mean, empowerment and trust. I mean, and then just hold them accountable. That's all. And when you make a mistake, I don't dislike you personally. It's not it's listen, you made a mistake. Cool. It's all right. I mean, make a mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's get better at it. And then, listen, if you make the same one over and over again, then we need to have a different discussion, but that's okay. But I don't dislike you personally. Yeah. And I think, when you talk about leaders versus managers and bosses, that's where they get into they're not talking about dealing with people, human beings. Yeah. It's all about the person. It's all about the human being. And those aspects all tie in together. And, oh, you messed up. And then, the knife hand comes out, and then, well, now they're afraid to make a mistake.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
You didn't empower them. You didn't trust them. And then you didn't just redirect them or guide them when they made a mistake. And now they're like, yeah, I'm not. So tell me now they ask to be micromanaged because I don't know what you expect from me from above.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let's talk about Commando Development. So what do you do? What is it? And, what do you do and what is it?
Yeah, sure. So Commando Development is, came out of the fact that these are my two kind of backgrounds, right? I'm a software developer and I'm a former commando. But there's really three different connotations of that. There's just to kind of maybe take a step back and say a little bit about the history of the commandos. So the commandos were born in the Second World War. If anyone wants a a really cool book to read. That's a fun read that is a bit about the history. You could read Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Conduct. And, you know, just like all of the stuff that we've been talking about, initially, this kind of irregular warfare was really frowned upon by the bureaucracy, right? The Ministry of War were determined that we would fight the Second World War like, you know, British gentlemen and, you know, fair fights and all the stuff that just is completely stupid. So they, you know, if Churchill hadn't have stepped in, Churchill was the prime minister at the time of the Second World War, and provided a protective envelope within which this organization could rise, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. So that's sort of lesson number one, is that if you want to do new, innovative things, you need to have a small teams, and they're your commandos, right? Your commandos are the ones that go in, do new things, don't need loads of structure, just get out of their way and let them do stuff, right? So that's the kind of early stage of a company. So let your commandos develop your new things. And then there's this point at which your commando team has now found something, you know, found an exploit that's worth doubling down on. And then you need to develop a team out of that initial commando raid, because, you know, what they've done is probably going to be a little bit messy. You know, it would have been expedient. And then you need to develop your commandos, right? So you need to develop them into a more kind of formed force. And then the third connotation of commando development is, if you're an established company, an established business, you've become very linear, and, you know, you found an exploit, and you just sort of, you've been extracting resource out of that exploit for as long as you can. And now all of a sudden the world's changed. Now, in many companies, there aren't any commandos left because they've all moved on because they've got bored, right? So then the cycle starts again, and you need to have the ability to develop internal commandos within your business to go out and, you know, do what that initial first founding team did. So that's the kind of reason I called the business Commando Development. And what I'm mostly focused on at the moment is helping businesses. I'm kind of focused on hospitality businesses at the moment because they're the ones with the greatest level of need. Take all of their disparate systems and basically build a command system out of that. So, you know, in order to make good decisions, you need the right data, you need timely data, and it needs to be in a format that people can use to do all of the dynamics that we've been talking about. So that's Commando Development in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I mean, like, because I'm sitting here thinking about, like, I mean, people don't know what they don't know.
No.
And when you're internal to the organization, you can often get you're caught up in the day to day. You're caught up in, I got to get this done. And then maybe revenue is decent. It's not, you know, great or bad, and you're continuing to move on. But when somebody like you can come from the outside and be like, here's these things that you're missing, and I can help you develop these systems and processes. It's not, and here's the thing, is the systems and processes to help them. It's not like we've talked about before. It's not just a key or something, a magic thing that's going to happen and that you need to be the one to do it. You're going to give them the systems and processes so that they can continue to use the right data to also maybe focus on building those teams to help extend the company and the leadership. I mean, that's really a cool thing and an important thing. And I think, you know, when people like yourself can see that others need help, and where that needs, like you said, hospitality, those are the ones that need the most help right now. You can see that need and you can prove value, you can show that value. Then they're like, oh, well, I didn't even notice that. They're more likely to bring you in and can help that industry. And hopefully, my thought is that as you're helping them create these systems and processes to help their company, it'll bleed down to the, you know, even the most junior workers, and contribute to, one, they feel empowered, trusted, and hopefully make a little bit more money in the process if the company's making more money too. So,
yeah, I mean, so one of the more recent books I've read, which I mean, it's recent to me, but it's a 40-year-old book, is a book called The Great Game of Business. And The Great Game of Business is the civilian version of warfighting, as far as I'm concerned, right? It's giving people the right information. It's telling them what the commander's intent, and in the business world, the commander's intent is communicated via financial information like your balance sheet and your cash flow. It's setting the right targets, and it's using the internal system that having that in place allows to build almost like a nervous system within the business. Because when small units compete in a war footing, when you're in competition with an enemy, what Boyd talks about is you want to cause a conceptual spiral. So what he talked about in aerial combat is that you act and disrupt your opponent such that they can't get a good fix on what's going on, and they can't actually take their own action. So they become kind of walled off from the external environment, so that they collapse, right? Their internal entropy grows, and they can't move, right? And that's what so many companies do to themselves. They get new executives come in every 6 months who have these new initiatives. They don't look at the external environment. They don't have the synapses within their business to be able to talk about the external environment, and it's just noise. It's noise and friction, and you have to re-establish that contact with the outside world so that you can start to have energy come in and you can start to make the right moves. And I just find it so interesting that exactly what we are trained to do in the military to an enemy is exactly what companies are doing to themselves every day across both of our countries. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And I think we've kind of mentioned it already in the show, but what is, I mean, really, really important here is you've been able to identify those skills and relate them to the civilian sector and reach out and help a need and, address it. And I think that's a lesson for so many of our service members that are exiting, even if they didn't come from, the small teams and the special forces type people, or type units. They have a lot of these similar skills and may not be as in detailed or whatever, but they have them. And I'll just use one, I'll just call it consulting. And it's a very generalized term in the business world, but
yep.
Consulting, you solve problems, right? You solve someone else's problem. That's what we do every day in the military. Every day you get a problem and you've got to figure it out, whether it's a junior soldier, a junior NCO. You've got to front, and these people come out of the military. I can't be a consultant. Like, why not? Yes, you can. You solve problems. I don't know anything about that. Yes, you do. And I think it's being able to recognize your skills and then also translate them into that civilian speak, and then show that you can bring value to that organization. And in this case, you have decided you're going to start your own business and then show that how you can bring that value to an organization to help them through what you've learned, which is really cool.
Yeah. And just, just for those people that are leaving the forces and think that they don't have the skills, in some cases, actually not having the skills is an advantage, because skills is nothing more than learned behaviors. And many industries are blighted by learned behaviors that are no longer appropriate for the context that they're in. So actually coming in with core principles and understanding the real basics that you can apply to any business is actually really beneficial. Okay, yeah, you don't know how marketing platforms work, but the principle of getting intelligence from an environment, right? The principle of translating that into decision support, things like that. Or if you're a logistician, the principles of supply and making the right plans and things like this. So, it's definitely not about needing, and this is as much a problem on the civilian side as well, not recognizing what military guys can offer, folks can offer. But yeah, it's not about having specific skills.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, today I released an episode, which I know this will be next week, but anyway, a military transition episode with Lucas Velmer. And one of the things, and this is maybe my new favorite quote, but being the dumbest person in the room can be the most advantageous.
Yeah, I love that.
Only if you take advantage of it and ask a million questions and then go and learn.
Yeah.
Because what you just said, like, okay, well, if I'm already predetermined, these are skills I have, and I'm just too focused and too rigid on that, then you won't be able to really develop and learn that stuff. So I think, what you said combined to what Luke said, like that's, really important and powerful. So I'm going to start.
And you have to have confidence to be the dumbest person in the room, because you have to have confidence to ask a question and know that it's a stupid question and say, fuck it, I'm going to ask it anyway, because I don't know. I don't understand.
Yes. Grant, how many times you and I have talked about this, especially on the senior levels, the senior NCOs and the officers, they just know it all. And they're not going to ask those questions. And they walk into job interviews or they walk into companies and they're just like, yep, I can do that. Yep, I know all that. Like, no, you don't. And it's okay not to. And they just like, all the time.
Yeah. You gotta check the ego at the door.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Every door you go through, not just the first one.
Yes, every door. Absolutely. I'm constantly learning. I don't know what I don't know, and that's awesome. And I'm going to learn, and we're going to figure this out together. And then there you go. Like, absolutely. Yeah, that's really good stuff. All right. So, let's talk about, we're going to kind of start winding up here, but let's get your take on Afghanistan right now. The last, 2 weeks, maybe even just overall withdrawal. I mean, should we have withdrawn? Grant and I've talked about this extensively. Essentially, we think we definitely should have withdrawn at some point. We can get into the semantics of when it should have happened, but yeah. So what do you think about what's going on right now? What are your thoughts? How do we fix it? Where do we go?
Wow. How long have we got? How long
Right.
So I think I shared a lesson on this. It was very popular on. I didn't share it. I stole it. But it's a quote from Sun Tzu, and Sun Tzu says, "Always abandon your most strategic airfield immediately before an evacuation." And of course, that's bullshit. But that is. I mean, that it sounds insane, doesn't it? But that's exactly what has been done, right? It's okay, we haven't evacuated. I mean, you can just literally spend 5 minutes with somebody with a lukewarm IQ and put all the facts on the table in front of them and say, right, what's the big problem here? And we haven't evacuated everyone that we're obligated to evacuate. The people who have fought by our side for the last 20 years. We haven't secured all of the resources and weapons that we have in country. We want to leave, sure, but we've got no plan. And I mean, the whole debacle in Iraq. So one of the really good books to read is Red Teaming, written by Bryce Hoffman, who I mentioned earlier. And before they went into Iraq, a few days before, maybe a few weeks before, they had a meeting with a guy who was like a sectarian leader in one of the I can't remember what his name was. And and they went into this meeting like all confident that we'll take Saddam out and everything will be great. And this guy looked them in the eye and said, if you do this, this country is going to be a fucking bloodbath. So they knew. And somehow that information was not able to go up the chain of command to somebody like, in that case, George Bush. But any politician seems to suffer this problem when they get to a certain level, apart from maybe, I don't know, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand or Angela Merkel in Germany. Seems odd that all of the leaders that are able to kind of rise above this nonsense are female.
May have something to that.
Yep. And so this is just an ongoing pattern where, your friends and mine are the ones that suffer and die, and the civilians of the countries that we go into are the ones that suffer and die, because people in leadership positions at the top level just seem incapable of learning that, you need to have a plan for things. It's just fucking insane. I don't understand how people can be in a leadership position and be that incompetent.
Yeah, that's so incompetent is maybe the most common word I think I've had with a lot of my friends in the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
And maybe combine that with shocked at the level of incompetence. And of course, we're trying to figure out, like, because I don't want to focus on blame right now, because we can Monday morning quarterback this when we're done.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so simple. Like you just said, when you put all the facts on the table, anybody would see that this is how it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And how did it not get up to that level? And I just don't.
Yeah, and it's not just military stuff either. Like I at the beginning of last year, I was working in. I took a short contract in the NHS when the National Health Service, when COVID was kicking off, and again, a small unit of us on the ground, looking at the facts, could immediately see some enormous holes in policy and the direction. And there was absolutely no way to tell that story up the chain of command, because the people, I don't know, let's say 2 or 3 levels above me, already had a story and were being fed information or desires down from above. And I don't know if it's the same in the States, but the people in leadership positions in government in this country tend to be the kind of children of wealthy people, haven't had to struggle for anything in their life, gone to all the best schools, but not had apparently any kind of good education. Classically kind of educated in things like, languages and politics. Zero engineers, zero scientists. And that is a very, very toxic mix, because you get all these people that are good at climbing the ladder. None of them have any fucking idea how the ladder actually works. And none of them will listen to people at the bottom of the ladder who do know how the ladder works telling them. And that's it in a nutshell. That's the reason that we're in a pickle. And you look at a country like New Zealand or let's say Germany, or some of the other countries that have done well here, led by scientists or engineers, led by people that can build teams and build consensus and be open to challenge. And you look at the fragile leaders that we've had in my country and yours, and I across both sides of the political divide, they've both been shit in the last few years. I don't know, and it's just it seems to be like a toxic downward spiral that is very, very difficult to know how to reverse.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. We don't have any of those people you're talking about in our political leadership. They're all career politicians. They're all elitist on both sides of the aisle, Democrats,
Yep.
Republicans. Absolutely. There are no engineers, very few veterans even at the senior level. Most of the senior level people are at least 65, if not 70 years old.
Yeah.
Like, so right. They just don't. Yeah. I absolutely agree. But I also agree with, I don't know how to fix it for us at this point, where our political structure is so bogged down by the bureaucracy that I just don't. I'm at a loss on. We used to always just resort to, well, just vote. Vote. Let's get people to vote. But that's just not the answer anymore.
No. So there's a movement afoot to try and rebuild the commons of sense making, if you like. So guys like Jim Rutt and Daniel Schmachtenberger and other folks that are trying to put the building blocks in place to allow people to make better decisions. Because the other thing is that your average member of the voting public is both completely uninformed about what's really happening in the world and completely unable to know that they're uninformed. So that is an incredibly dangerous mix.
Yes.
And I don't know what to do about that either. I mean,
yeah,
armchair quarterbacking this is definitely not going to be an easy task.
Right. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist in this manner of discussion, and I can really say in our country, I feel like the government has, over the decades, has put us in positions, and even with our military force, there's so few of us that have served when we went from the draft to the all volunteer force, so few people even know who we are and understand us. And so if you don't have skin in the game, you don't really care.
Yep.
And also with the same, even not talking about the military, but talking about every other thing. So we've got a situation in our country where it takes both parents to work, essentially to live, possibly to work multiple jobs. So they don't have time to be informed about this stuff. And they don't care because they've got to pay their bills. And I think, over the last few decades, our government has really created this situation through economic policies in our country to where we're just forced to hit the rat race and work, and to where we can't be informed of all this stuff, which means we're not going to raise a ruckus.
Yep.
And then they'll throw us a bone of a stimulus every now and then. Here's a couple $100, go be happy. And so yeah, I think it just, and I don't know how to solve it. I don't know how to fix it either. And I feel like we're so big in our country, like the bureaucracy part. And then I'll just throw this stupid number out there, $3.5 trillion quote infrastructure bill that our government's trying to figure out how to pass. And like, listen, it doesn't even, I guarantee you nobody will feel the impact of it.
Yeah.
Well, no person will. All the lobbyists and the companies of where that money goes to will.
Yeah.
And so, that's where we're at. Like,
yeah, it's dire, and it's the same here. Like, we spent 37 billion pounds on a track and trace app for COVID, right? And it was a total waste of money. It was clear from the get-go. Like, I was actually in a conference call with Boris Johnson at one point. I've got a great picture of me sitting here with my finger up at him because I was infuriated.
I love
it. The really scary version of this is that it's not even nefarious people within government. It's just the way our society has evolved. Yes, there are definitely some people, both within and around government, who are massively benefiting, like, the kind of media barons and lobbyists and business people. But the scary thing about the war, this idea of there's a war on sense making, is that none of this is designed. Like, Mark Zuckerberg did not design Facebook to be this kind of democracy destroying thing. It's just that people who wanted to benefit in that way figured out how to use that tool, which was an advertising tool, to get people's attention. They figured out how to use the affordance of that tool to do something that it wasn't designed for. And that's, that is the engine of progress of human society, both good and bad, right? That's what we've done since we picked up a stick and sharpened it and used it to kill animals, right? It's
right.
It's this human ingenuity of figuring out something that you can use in your environment and using it to get a benefit. And unfortunately, that has tipped over the point where that's no longer good for society as a whole. And that is the historical response to that is that the society just burns itself out and collapses. That's what's happened every single time in history up until now.
Yep.
So, you'd have to be quite brave to bet against that happening again, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I ain't taking that bet. Just not going to do it. So, all right, man, this was a great episode. It covered lots of different topics. I think, Ben, you're doing some really amazing things out there. I love how you've translated your military service over to, the business side, and you're really trying to make, a positive impact on these businesses and help them become better. And I don't want to say more efficient, because I don't like that word either. We love the
effective. I prefer effective.
There you go. Effective. I mean, because we get sucked into the Six Sigma thing again, that's your manufacturing plant. So let's be more effective. So I like that. Really good stuff. I like your common sense approach, and you're just basic, hey, I'm not a rocket scientist, but this is just kind of what I think about some of these things. And it's really probably your thoughts probably represent a lot of average people in our world. And somehow we've got to figure out how to get more of these thoughts out there and get more of us together with these things. So really cool. Grant, what you got, man, as we get ready to close out here?
Oh man, thanks for coming on, Ben. I really enjoyed this one. I'm always interested to learn or figure out what our allies are thinking, what the national sentiment is, in Great Britain and Australia. So it's interesting that we have so many similarities that I didn't realize between not only our military but our political scenario, and very interesting. So, but I gotta give a shout out to Dr. Yusuf Smith for telling me to reach out to Ben. So Ben was on his show. He's a doctor over there in the UK. So y'all are fortunate there. You got, one of the best doctors on the planet over there in the UK, So,
Yeah,
no,
that was a fun episode with him as well. I had a blast today, guys. It's been really good.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I'm
thanks.
glad. I'm glad. And, I will throw out an open invitation to bring you back again.
Love to.
It's a lot of fun. And, so, hey, networking, right? I mean, we found you, Grant found you through this other person, and that's just a huge key in getting us connected through life. And you mentioned Facebook, like that wasn't the intent to do its bad stuff now. Like it really was meant to connect people. And, and we can still find ways to do that of connecting each other and, just bringing common thoughts together, or being able to even disagree if we don't, think the other thought without hating each other as a person. So, yeah, no, that's great. Awesome episode. I really enjoyed it, and, absolutely open invitation to come back anytime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And,
That was really good fun. I mean, there's loads more where that came from, right? We could talk about this stuff all day long, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We could.
great.
Grant and I talk about it all day long, all the time, I think. But so no, that's cool. All right. Well, thanks again, Ben. And of course, my co-host Grant. It's always a pleasure to have you on. So appreciate both of y'all being here.
My pleasure, guys. Yeah, looking forward to round two.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for tuning in for another really exciting episode of Miller's Military Moments. And our mission here is bringing you unfiltered stories from military service from all over the world. And this is just another example of that, bringing Ben from the UK. Although somewhat different, they are very like us, as you heard today. So thanks again for listening to us. The best places to find me, millersmilitarymoments.com. And Grant, you can find him projectcapable.com. Both of our social medias are on those links. On the post for this show that'll be on the blog section, I'm also going to include some of the books that were mentioned by Ben today, and other links that were mentioned in this show. So be sure to check it out. And, again, thanks everybody for listening. It's a great time. And as always, be kind, be compassionate, and be you. Until next time, peace.